All right. I think we are live. I am just going to get a couple things set up over here on my end. And thanks for joining me tonight on another Thursday. Den is not here yet. If he appears, he'll help out in the comments. Otherwise, I'm just going to try to moderate the comments as best I can in between stories. And I have so many things we are going to talk about today. Strangely enough, some of these stories are actually positive for once. But as always, if you want to support what I'm doing here, you can always support the show by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And as always, if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, which is where I put out most of these stories, you can go to friendlyatheist.com. I appreciate that always. Let's go ahead then and get started. And like I said, Den will come later on, hopefully, and he'll take care of any comments, moderation, things like that. Let's start by talking about what the Supreme Court did this week. They heard probably the biggest case this term regarding church-state separation, and it threatens to dismantle church-state separation even further, as if such a thing were even possible at this point. So I'm going to try to give you the background, a little bit of background about what this argument was even about, and then talk a little bit about what the justices said. Basically, this case involved St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School, which is a publicly funded charter school that Christians wanted to open in Oklahoma last year until the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, "What the hell are you doing?" and voted 7-1 against allowing this place to open because clearly it violates church-state separation. Oklahoma's constitution has a law that says you can't use public money to promote religion. That's totally what this was. But since it also violates the federal constitution, it was a federal issue as well. And it's not just that the state would have been funding this Catholic school. The problems went beyond that. Just to name a few, unlike public schools, St. Isidore would not require teachers to be certified. They would not have to accept openly LGBTQ teachers. They could explicitly promote Catholic doctrine during school hours. Then you have the possibilities like what happens if a student becomes pregnant because they're teenagers? That sort of stuff happens. Well, they could expel that kid. What about trans students? If they commit the crime of existing, this school could kick them out because, the Catholic Church doesn't accept trans people. Sex education, probably not a part of the curriculum. And this school would probably not have the resources to help special needs students. So this was not a charter school that happened to be Catholic. This is a Catholic school that decided to call itself a charter school so it could take money from the state pocketbook. You know what I mean? One of the surprising supporters of church-state separation in all this is this guy, Gentner Drummond. He's the Attorney General of Oklahoma. He's also a Republican nominee for governor of Oklahoma. He's also a surprising supporter of church-state separation. He's one of the only high-ranking Republicans in the state of Oklahoma who defends church-state separation. And this guy argued that, hey, taxpayers in my state do not need to foot the bill for this religious school. He actually filed the lawsuit to stop this Catholic school from opening. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court took his side in all this. But naturally, when that decision came down 7-1 from the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the defenders of this place said, don't worry, since it's also a federal issue, we're going to ask our buddies on the U.S. Supreme Court to look into this. And that's where they made the argument that denying us this chance to take public dollars, that's religious discrimination. This is how SCOTUS blog described their argument here. The school contended that the Oklahoma Supreme Court's ruling unconstitutionally punished the free exercise of religion. Oops, let me pull this back up here. There we go. By disqualifying the religious from government aid. What's more, the school argued, the state Supreme Court circumvented the U.S. Supreme Court's cases establishing a right to the free exercise of religion by transmuting St. Isidore into an arm of the government. They're basically saying, look, we have nothing to do with the state government, the federal government. We are a private school. We just happen to be a charter school, and we just happen to be religious, so give us all your money. It doesn't make any sense. Also, they're not disqualified from government aid, but they can't have a school, a public school, which is what they want to call this thing, and take government aid while also promoting religion. You do that on your own dime. It makes no sense. So the state of Oklahoma, Gentner Drummond, the attorney general, he told the Supreme Court, don't take up this case. You have no reason to take up this case because the school is promoting its religious beliefs. The Oklahoma Constitution says you can't do that. There's no argument here. End of story. But SCOTUS took it up anyway. I should point out that Amy Coney Barrett decided to recuse herself from the case. She's not participating in it. She didn't actually explain why, but the basic theory is that she's really close friends with a law professor at Notre Dame, where she used to work, who has helped advise the Catholic schools legal team. And so to avoid any perception of bias, Amy Coney Barrett said, I'm not involved in this. Okay, fine. That still leaves 8 justices. And the way this works is if there's right now it's a 5-3 split. Conservatives still have a majority. If the ruling turns out to be a 4-4 tie, that's as good as a win for the good guys. The Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision would stand. But the thinking is, well, there are 5 conservative justices. They're going to do exactly what you think they're going to do. The other thing I want to point out is that a coalition of church-state separation groups, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the ACLU, the Education Law Center, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they argued there's no argument here. The law is fine in Oklahoma as is. Nothing was violated. This is what their statement was back in January when the Supreme Court took up this case. The law is clear. Charter schools are public schools, so they must be secular and open to all students. The Oklahoma Supreme Court correctly found that the state's approval of a religious public charter school was unlawful and unconstitutional. We urge the U.S. Supreme Court to just say that's correct and safeguard public education, church-state separation, and religious freedom for all. Oklahoma taxpayers, including our plaintiffs, should not be forced to fund a religious public school that plans to discriminate against people into one religion and indoctrinate students into one religion. Converting public schools into Sunday schools would be a dangerous sea change for our democracy. So, yeah, it's a strong statement, but it totally makes sense. And they also, I should say, filed their own lawsuit to block this school from getting public funding. But Gentner Drummond, the attorney general, he said, I got this. Their lawsuit was put on hold. His went forward. The Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled on his case and said this school should not be allowed to exist, not with federal state funding. So, it is possible that the U.S. Supreme Court could say Oklahoma is required to fund, if you have a charter school program, you have to allow religious schools in that mix. If they want to go nuclear, they could say any state that funds public schools, which is all of them, have to fund religious schools too. That's one way this could also go. And so this is the concern. This is what people were worried about and thinking about when the oral arguments happened this week, because you want a hint of what exactly are these conservative justices who have the majority going to do here, right? By the way, not only is Gentner Drummond on the side of church-state separation, his other Oklahoma colleagues are very much not on his side. Governor Kevin Stitt, another MAGA Republican, is like, I want money to go to religion. Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction, he totally wants this school to get state dollars. He actually helped the board vote to allow this school to get, state dollars. So what happened at the actual oral argument this week? The biggest thing I can tell you is that things don't look good. That's not a surprise, but the question is, what were they going to do? Ian Millhiser, a writer at Vox.com, summarized the oral arguments this way, and he basically honed in on something Brett Kavanaugh said. His argument, Brett Kavanaugh's argument, is that so long as an American can choose not to participate in a state-backed religious operation, church and state don't need to be separate. Indeed, separation of church and state is often unconstitutional. Church and state itself, separation of church and state itself is unconstitutional. Brett Kavanaugh's argument during oral arguments was that, look, nobody's forcing kids to go to this Catholic school. Therefore, church-state separation has not been violated. But if you think giving taxpayer dollars to a Catholic school is okay, then we don't have church-state separation. So this, whatever line, the thread he is trying to do here, it doesn't make any sense. And Kavanaugh's new regime would mandate a great deal of state funding for religious schools, so long as parents retain a choice about where to send their child. You can imagine where this goes, because if he rules the way he's suggesting here, and that becomes the new law, then states would have to fund all sorts of religious schools, and you know they would be mostly Catholic, mostly private Christian type of schools. Taxpayers would have to fund all of that, and Brett Kavanaugh would say that's totally fine because no one's making you go to them. But where is that money coming from? That's money that would come out of the coffers meant for public schools that are supposed to educate everybody in a secular way. Like, it's not hard to see where a bad decision here could go. It would mean a lot of public funding for religious schools, which, like, you have no way around this. That would mean destroying public schools across the country, which really is the goal of religious conservatives for such a long time. That has been their goal. Now, Elena Kagan, one of the liberal justices, she tried to point out that this would be a horrible idea. She spent much of the argument trying to draw out the implications of her court's new approach to religion. What if a religious charter school refuses to educate students who don't share the school's faith? What if that religious charter school wants to toss out state standards altogether? She brought up the example of an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva where instruction would focus almost entirely on the Talmud to the exclusion of math and English. Do we have to fund that school as well? And the answer is yeah. It doesn't matter to any of these justices, the conservative ones, if a religious charter school wants to impose its religious beliefs onto the students, onto the staff. If they say, yeah, we're not going to teach math anymore, but we are a school, we're a religious charter school, and you have to fund us, they can get away with not having to follow state standards either. No laws would apply to them. They're basically immune from doing the things you need a school to do, and you would expect a taxpayer-funded public school to do. They would just get around that by just saying, we're religious. We have these beliefs. I mean, this is where things could go. I think this may be the reason Amy Coney Barrett felt fine recusing herself from this case, maybe because she knows damn well that there are still 5 of her buddies ready to dismantle church-state separation. You don't need my vote. I will leave here just to avoid any misperceptions. So that's scary. I mean, the one silver lining during the oral arguments appeared to be that John Roberts, who is somehow the only possible moderate voice, which is a scary thing to say, John Roberts kind of needled both sides of the argument. He made some of the arguments I'm making here. He also pointed out that slippery slope of what could happen if you have taxpayer dollars going to religious schools. But also, he's John Roberts. He's totally going to do the thing conservatives always do. Like, why should we expect him to suddenly join with the liberals on this issue and allow the Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision to stand? So right now, the best hope liberals have is finding some argument that John Roberts can latch onto because the rest of the justices are hopeless. And that's never a bet you want to take. That's like saying, well, I hope a Republican senator will do the right thing. Like, they're not. Where have you been? You can't count on them to do the right thing. So that's where we're at. The only question now is not who's going to win or lose. It doesn't look good for church-state separation. The question is, what will the scope be of the final decision? Does it apply to just that school? Does it apply to just Oklahoma? Does it dismantle public education as we know it across the country? Who knows? So I will pause there for now. It's a scary story, but if you have questions, I'm going to scroll up right now and just see what questions we have. I appreciate this donation here. Satanic Temple to open a school after this. This is an interesting thought. Like, let's say the Supreme Court says you can have taxpayer dollars go into public schools and religious schools count. They can count under that system. First of all, the barrier to opening your own school is a huge one. It takes a lot of money. You got to have staff to pull it off. There's a lot of things that have to happen. And even a group like the Satanic Temple that you would imagine doing this, where they have pushed for that sort of argument is, let's have after school clubs, because you need like one volunteer to run it and someone to manage like the paperwork. That's relatively easy. What about release time from school, taking kids out of class to go have religious education? It's also not hard to say, we'll set up a transportation system, take you to a building, have one volunteer teach those classes. But the idea that the Satanic Temple, or even an atheist or humanist group, would go through all the hassle of literally setting up their own school and all the professional paperwork you need done to make that happen, that's not something they could really pull off. It's why you really don't see any like humanist charter schools across the country either, because we just don't have the money or the manpower to pull that off. And also, what's the difference between a humanist charter school and like a good public school that just doesn't push religion into it? Because we are not trying to push atheism, and the Satanic Temple isn't trying to push Satan onto kids. All we want is for a good, strong public school system that is secular and teaches comprehensive things like sex education and science education. You don't need a Satanic Temple version of this, but even if they wanted to, they couldn't just magically pull this one out of their ass like they could in other cases. So as much as I want to think, okay, if they want to open that door, we're going to be right there. No, we won't. It's Catholic schools. It's fundamentalist Christian schools that have the money and the resources to pull this sort of stuff off. It's also why, if they say you can have religious, taxpayer-funded religious schools, a lot of minority religions and smaller Christian groups would be shut out because they just can't build their own school from scratch. They can't even rent it out and staff it. They don't have that sort of those resources. So I don't think that's going to happen. Blaze Bunny points out, this is all a part of Project 2025. Nothing about this is new. People should have taken it more seriously. I mean, dismantling public education, absolutely a part of Project 2025, even if this particular case was not. So yeah, very scary stuff. This is an interesting comment. The fact that the school's religious honestly seems moot, since the school doesn't comply with basic public school standards. And this is where there might be pushback. Let's say the Supreme Court says, yeah, if you're a public charter school and you happen to be religious, taxpayer funds still can go to you. What lawmakers would then have to do is to say, fine, we're going to allow religious schools to have access to the funds. However, all schools must have accessibility for students with disabilities. And then that's a barrier those religious groups would have to go through. Maybe they might do what they did in Maine, where they say, okay, fine, you can be eligible for public funding, but you can't discriminate against LGBTQ students or staffers. And all of a sudden, those religious schools would have to ask themselves, is this the hill we want to die on? So there is a way to push back against it, but you shouldn't have to push back against something like this. Like, you should just be able to have a good public school system that's there to benefit everybody. It's really frustrating. Hammond, do you think in this new Trump era, church-state separation will still be a thing at the end of his term? I mean, he's not going to pass a law. Congress is not going to pass a law saying, let's get rid of the First Amendment. Let's get rid of the Establishment Clause. What they will do is what they've always done, which is they chip away at it, but they don't tell you that's what they're doing. Those of us who follow this stuff totally know that's what they're doing. I mean, just today, what did Trump do? He fired Mike Waltz, one of his security guys, the guy who invited the journalist onto his Signal chat. And today, finally, Trump said he's fired, but he didn't say that. They waited for a couple weeks for the story to die down. And then today, Trump said, I'm removing him from the security post and making him UN ambassador. So what did he do? Well, he fired the dude. What did he say he's going to do, though? J.D. Vance said in an interview today, we're just giving him a promotion. Like, that's how they do it. They don't want to tell you the truth. They find a way to spin what's totally going on. But you only know that if you actually follow the story. So that's what I think is going to happen. He's not, like, Trump's not going to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. They're not going to pass a law getting rid of it. What they will do is just say, all right, IRS, we're going to defund you so you don't have any staff. And by the way, even if you do have staff, just ignore this. So the law is there, but no one's there to enforce it. That's how church-state separation will die. Not because they, exploded a hole into the wall between church and state. It's by just saying, hey, this wall, it doesn't mean anything. Let's just pretend it's not there. And then what happens? Like, it's there in writing, but no one's paying attention to it. It's there in the law, but Trump has installed enough judges who just ignore it. That is what I fear is going to happen. Who can we call or write to voice our opposition? I assume you are writing this about the Supreme Court case, and the answer is nobody. You can go back in time and write letters to Trump voters in October of 2024 and tell them, don't make the mistake that we totally know you're going to make. I mean, Canada found a way to make the right decision. They're much smarter in Canada than they are here. Okay, I am going to jump to a totally different story. Den is not here, so it's still just me. But let me jump to this next bit. Give me 1 second. I figured I should share some good news with you, and the next one's a good one. Okay. Let's talk about the Southern Baptists. Because the Southern Baptist Convention, it is the largest Protestant denomination in the country. Every year they release what they call the annual church profile, which is basically their roundup of like, how is our denomination doing? Remember, the Catholic Church has a Vatican. It's a very hierarchical, top-down approach. The Southern Baptist Convention doesn't do it that way. They have a group of people who kind of lead the denomination. There is a guy at the helm as president, but by and large, they cannot tell every single church, like, this is how you do things. They just have a million different churches that do their things. And if they are a member of the SBC, those churches give dues to the, SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, and they're in good standing with the church. But like, the SBC can't really tell you what to do. So it's not that top down. But they do send out a survey every year to their churches saying, hey, can you tell us what's happening in your church? And how many members do you have? How many baptisms did you do? Things like that. So every year, the SBC releases the results of that survey. And this is the picture. This is the headline I want to share with you. This is from Lifeway Research, which is their research arm. This is the headline they shared this week. Southern Baptist membership decline continues amid other areas of growth, which is a fun way of spinning it. I want to focus on that graph specifically because this is just beautiful. Let's talk about this incredible graph right here. The headline at the top, Southern Baptist Convention membership falls for the 18th straight year. This is, seriously, there's so much going on here that's worth talking about. So let's just focus on the membership bit first. So membership has declined for 18 straight years. That peak you see in that graph, like right around there, that's roughly 2003. So they were growing and growing and growing until 2003. And ever since then, it's just literally been going downhill ever since. Now, last year, the headline, the way they spun this news last year is they said, okay, we're losing members, but we're losing them slower than we were in the years prior. So they said their rate of loss was lower. And that was a good thing. Well, guess what happened this year? They're right back to losing members quickly. So they can't focus on that anymore. What else did they say? 18th year of decline. The Southern Baptist Convention now has roughly 12.7 million members. And by members, that means these are 12.7 million people who are members of a cooperating church. That's a 2% decline from the year before. So that's interesting. Just to give you some other numbers here. In 2021, they had 13.7 million members. 2022, 13.2 million. 2023, 12.99 million. And now the 2024 data we just got, 12.7 million. So that's where we're at. That's how they're declining. The last time they had numbers this bad, if you can draw like a horizontal line from this point above my head to wherever it meets elsewhere in the chart, the last time they had this membership, it was in 1974. This chart, by the way, it begins in 1950, but it's 1974 when their membership was still going up and Jimmy Carter was soon to be elected president. So it's been over 50 years since they've seen membership this low. In 2003, when they had their record high, that was 16.3 million members. The other way they're spinning this is they have this other chart where they say, okay, our membership is growing, but I'm going to remove myself here so we can talk about this. Our membership is declining. That's the blue line at the top. But look at the bottom, you guys. There's stuff that's going up. Do you see the stuff going? Look at this. Look at that. There's stuff going up. What is it that's going up over the past few years? If we scroll over here, worship attendance. Attendance is going up. Small group attendance is going up. So what they're saying is more people are now attending church than they used to, which makes sense because 2020 is the pandemic. People are not going to church. And since 2020, sure, more and more people are returning to church, but they are not at the numbers they were pre-pandemic. So you can brag about that one all you want, but it's still not great. And by the way, who cares if more people are attending church if you're still losing all those members? They're losing like 250,000 members since last year, but they went up a little bit, so okay. There's another chart I want to show you. This is the thing they're proudest of. And I'll zoom in on this so you can see this. Southern Baptist Convention baptisms, top 250,000, highest level since 2017. And if you look at the bottom there, it makes sense that, as the pandemic was happening, the number of baptisms hit a record low. They're not bringing anyone into the SBC. But since 2020, that number has been going up, and they have now hit, they're back to where they were in like 2017. So they're really excited about the baptisms. And that's why they want to show you these graphs. So this is the news that came out this week that they're super excited about. And let's talk about what all this means. To me, I think here's the big takeaway. It doesn't matter how many people get baptized if the baptismal pool is leaking faster than they can refill it. So why are they excited about baptisms? Because that means you got new members joining the church. But at the same time, you got more people leaving the church than entering it. So who the hell cares? Like, if you want to be excited about people getting dunked in water and you're trying to get people to stop staring at the fact that more people are just leaving your church altogether, I mean, good luck to you. Let's talk about a few other things. Another reason their membership is declining. Why is that happening? I'm going to get into the specifics of why I think it's happening in a while. But in 2023, I want to show you this. Maybe I don't have it for you here. In 2023, last year, when they were losing all those members, the executive director of Lifeway Research, his name is Scott McConnell, he said, okay, let me explain to you why you're seeing a drop in membership. It's because a lot of churches are just catching up on their paperwork. He's like, they're cleaning up their membership rolls and getting rid of people who clearly stopped participating in a church, years ago. And now that they're cleaning up their records, that's why you're seeing lower membership. So in other words, it's not that people are leaving the church, it's that they left a long time ago. We're finally crossing their name off the list. And that's why you see these numbers getting lower. That's what he said last year. What does this guy say this year? Because, it doesn't take you that long to clean up the rolls. Well, he didn't mention the rolls at all. This is what McConnell is saying now. Let me show you this. Growth in baptisms continues to exceed trend lines before the pandemic. The slow return of pre-COVID worship attendees is largely over. Churches' new attendees are now mostly new believers and those transferring from other churches. Which, fine, that may be true, but you are clearly not addressing the bigger elephant in the room, which is that, guess what? A whole bunch of other people want nothing to do with Southern Baptists at all. So why are all these people leaving? Well, some of them are just dying because, Southern Baptists, a lot of them are old. But nowhere in this entire report that they released analyzing the data, they did not mention how people are turned off by the SBC's pathetic attempts at handling sex abuse within its walls, how they have downplayed sexual misconduct among former leaders, how they have punished churches who have women on their staff, more on that in a second, how they have pushed out Black pastors who fought against, the racism in the SBC, how they have pushed out prominent advocates because they were too woke or something, and of course, all the anti-LGBTQ stuff. A different 2024 survey found that negative religious teachings or treatment of gay and lesbian people is one of the top reasons they gave for why they left the religion of their childhood. And the Southern Baptist Convention is like, no, we're going to double down on our bigotry. Here's another thing you should know. This is from the Tennessean, and they did an analysis of this data. Check this out. 3 big megachurches, 3 key megachurches. Saddleback, that's Rick Warren's church in Southern California. An Elevation Church, that's Stephen Furtick's church in North Carolina. And this other one, New Spring Church, they've all left the convention in the past couple of years. New Spring just left a few weeks ago. And all 3 of those are among the 100 biggest churches in the country. So why did all 3 of those churches leave? It's because they are so big and they have so many pastors on staff. Like, yeah, Rick Warren's the pastor, but they also have like a dozen or 2 dozen other pastors who specialize in various things. Like you have the youth pastor and you have the one who helps you with your finances and things like that. Well, at these churches, they decided, hey, let's make women who are qualified to do it the pastors who are in charge of, womaning stuff, or, maybe they're pastors of something else. And they said they're good at it. And the people in our church like them leading the church in that capacity. They're not the person at the top of the pyramid, but they're in the leadership. They are pastors. And the Southern Baptist Convention is like, yeah, we don't like it when women have any sort of power whatsoever. And those 3 megachurches are like, well, if we were making us choose between keeping these women on our staff and being associated with the SBC, we get more out of the women than we do with you. So we're going to stick with them and leave the SBC altogether. And what that means is, I know 250,000 people have left the SBC since last year. These megachurches have like tens of thousands of members on their own. So when they leave, those are like tens of thousands of people leaving the SBC as well, unless they decided to go to a new church. That doesn't account for why all those people are leaving, but it's a big number. And it also sends a message that, you know what? The SBC isn't giving anything to us that we think we need. We think we are too big to fail. We don't need you. And we can use the money we would have given you in other ways. So that's why those big megachurches are leaving. And guess what? The reason they're even releasing this report now, this week, is because next month, the Southern Baptist Convention is going to hold its annual meeting where they vote on various things. And one of the biggest debates they are having right now is whether they are going to approve a new law for Southern Baptists that says all cooperating churches have to promise to, quote, not affirm, appoint, or employ a woman as a pastor of any kind. No women in leadership. They're going to vote on that law probably and probably adopt it. And so they're going to, even though this was like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't have any women on your staff, it wasn't an ironclad rule. And now they're about to make it an ironclad rule. So that's interesting. So what that means is instead of addressing all these issues that turn people off from Southern Baptist churches entirely, they're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and saying, yeah, but we got a lot of baptisms. So like, don't worry, everything's going great. What about the sexual abuse problem within the Southern Baptist Church? This is an interesting paragraph from Bob Smetana at Religion News Service right here. Along with demographic decline, because their members are dying, the SBC has experienced significant conflict over the past decade with leadership turnover at several of its major agencies, feuds over politics, and a sex abuse scandal which led to millions in legal costs and a series of reforms passed in 2022. That actually sounds good. Those reforms, including a database listing abusive pastors, have stalled in recent years, with leaders saying that for now, it's not a priority. And let's talk about that database for a second. You know how the Catholic Church, one of the criticisms people have had of the Catholic Church is, okay, we know there was a priest that was accused of doing some horrible things. And what did the Catholic Church do? Well, they took that priest and they moved him to another Catholic church, maybe in another state, maybe a few towns over. And those priests just got shuffled around and they kept doing their abuse. Well, what happens in the SBC? Because again, it's not centralized. One guy at the top of the SBC pyramid cannot move a bad egg to a different place. So what happens is there might be some small mom and pop Baptist church. They call themselves Southern Baptist. They are part of the system, and they hire one of their buddies to run child camp at the church. Turns out that dude's a really bad guy, commits crimes with those kids. So what happens? At best, the church decides we're not going to keep him around anymore. Let's fire this person. And then what does that person do? Well, they could just go to a Baptist church across the street, and there's no coordination between the two, which means it's really easy, harder than it would be in the Catholic Church, for some bad apple in the SBC to just move church to church. And a few years ago, local newspaper reporters decided to do an inventory of all these staffers who have been accused of crimes and charged with crimes of sexual abuse. And they found there were so many, and they were all over the country. And the Southern Baptist Convention said, what if we had a database where we kept track of these guys who have criminal records for abuse? That way, if a church is thinking about hiring some of these people, they could at least check in with us and find out if that person's on the list. And they were like, well, that opens us up to a lot of legal liability. So let's just not have a list. And so that list is off the table now. Meanwhile, some of their own, high up leaders have been accused of misconduct and all of that. And there are lawsuits. It's wild. Here's another thing to tell you. Last year, when the membership was declining again, the Southern Baptist Convention said when they sent out their survey to ask churches about membership, they said, hey, we have a couple other questions for you. Number one, do you do a background check on all your staffers who work with kids? And also, do your staffers get trained in reporting sexual abuse to authorities? And what they found last year is that only 58% of SBC-affiliated congregations required background checks for people who work with kids. Only 58%. And only 38%, only 38% of staff was trained in reporting sexual abuse. Only 16% said they were trained in caring for survivors of that abuse. So guess what those numbers are this year? We don't know because they stopped asking that question because they're like, oh, is everyone good now? No one's asking about it. Let's just not ask it and hope the problem goes away. So they didn't even ask about like background checks for staffers, which means, by the way, that just over half of SBC congregations say they do background checks even for people who work with children. I mean, they haven't learned a damn thing. I mean, and the reason some of them probably don't do it is because they're really small churches. They can't hire someone to do human resources, and they don't think they need to do background checks because how do they hire people? They know a guy. So they feel like they don't have to do it. But at the very least, those churches should create policies to minimize problems. But it seems like the SBC just doesn't care about this issue to resolve it. Here's another reason people are leaving. Their public outreach is horrible. The best example of public outreach by the SBC that I can think of in recent memory is that in 2022, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention at the time, his name was Bart Barber, he appeared on 60 Minutes to do an interview. And they were going to show the new face of the SBC and how it's dealing with all these controversies. And he got praised. He got a lot of positive press for being willing to sit down with 60 Minutes, address really hard questions. But do you know what he said in that interview? That was like the best thing that's happened to the SBC in a while. He said, I think, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, yeah, I think it's right to force children to have their rapists' babies because he thinks fetuses matter more than human mothers. He also promoted conversion therapy, which is dangerous and ineffective. He said someone in a same-sex marriage could not possibly be a good Christian. He denied the existence of trans people. He said he voted for Donald Trump in 2020. And I'm not saying like the decline in membership is his fault. It was happening well before he came around. But if the chief representative of your religion, kind of like Pope Francis, you know what I mean? Someone who is praised for saying or doing certain things still manages to say, my faith teaches me that, Jesus was homophobic, that God wants to further traumatize victims of sexual assault, that the thrice married racist who paid hush money to a porn star he was having an affair with when his current wife was pregnant with his 5th child and who still is a threat to democracy, that guy could still get his support. I mean, it's no wonder that less media savvy pastors are not keeping people, especially young ones, in the pews. And I sincerely hope that as Donald Trump continues to get more and more unpopular, he's going to drag down a lot of these conservative Christians with him. Like everything Trump does, you should just assume that's what the white evangelical churches, they're fine with it. Southern Baptist churches, they're fine with it. Everything Trump does, those denominations are by and large okay with. And so if you don't like him, you should take it out on them and not join their clubs. So that's why it's hard to feel bad that they're losing membership. Like they may be losing members, but we as a society are not losing anything of value. And the faster the rest of those people get the hell out of there, the closer we get to a country where Southern Baptists don't have the political power they have now. I want to show you one last thing, because despite all of this, the SBC is doing just fine financially. Like if I told you Elon Musk had a bad day in the stock market, you wouldn't feel bad for him. You would laugh to start with, but also he's still going to be like the richest guy in the world. So who the hell cares if he has a bad day in the stock market? Guess how the SBC did financially last year? Well, let me show you this. In 2023, this is from their report this year. Let me pull this out here. Look right where my head is. In 2023, they made over $10 billion. What do they make in 2024 with this membership decline? Oh no, it's at $9.56 billion. Like, okay, they made $500 million less than they did the year before. They're doing fine. If they can't survive off the $9.5 billion they made, I don't know what's wrong with them. So despite all of this, the SBC is still powerful. 4.4% of Americans are Southern Baptists right now. It makes them the largest Protestant denomination. Like I said, The second place, what's the second largest Protestant denomination? United Methodist, and that's only 2.2% of the country. So Southern Baptists still have, even though they have a small percentage, 4.4%, that is bigger than pretty much everyone else. But if the numbers we are seeing here continue to be trends, there's a reason to think Southern Baptists are not going to become more popular in the future. So you know what? Have all the baptisms you want. It doesn't change the writing on the wall, which is that old people are dying. A lot of people are leaving your church. And yeah, there's a handful of people who are still in your church who are finally getting around to getting baptized. But that's not what you need right now. You need bodies in the seats, and they are not there. So I think people are starting to realize how damaging these beliefs are, and they're leaving. And maybe they're not ditching God altogether. They might believe in a higher power, but they are discovering, I think, that their lives are perfectly fine without having to support churches that do more harm than good. All right, I am going to stop there. Let's get to some questions here. This is just me looking. Den's not here. But all right, what is this? What are they doing with all that money anyway? The best answer I could give you, benefit of the doubt answer I could give you, is that a lot of that money, and the reason so many churches remain in the SBC, is that the SBC as a whole is able to spend that money on international programs. Yes, mission trips, but also international aid. And they can help foreign countries in ways that one individual church, even a megachurch, could not do on its own. So that's the benefit. That's why you want to be a member of the SBC if you're a smaller church, because you're like, we can contribute to something we feel is really good. So that's where a lot of that money goes. I'm sure there's plenty they're doing with it I don't like, but also that's in theory what they're doing with all that money. What other questions do we got here? Thoughts, comments? I was a Southern Baptist, left in my 20s, and I've only gotten better since. Yeah, it's never too late to leave. Good for you. I like that. Growing up in the SBC, it did make me an atheist, but it's awful. That is what I've heard anecdotally from plenty of people as well. Let's see what else we got here before I jump to the next story. I apologize if I'm missing really good questions. When I finish a story, if you want to leave a comment telling me which one I should tackle, let me know. Oh, by the way, while I'm in the middle of this, on May 18th, that is a Sunday, if you are in the Chicagoland area, I will be giving a talk at the Skokie Public Library. That's on May 18th. I believe it's at like 1:30 in the afternoon. I'll have more information in my newsletter soon. But if you're in the area and you're interested, come check it out. It should be, I believe it's a free talk. Come on by. We'll talk about what Ryan Walters is doing in Oklahoma, because that will take 7 hours to discuss. Okay, let's talk about a different story. Let's talk about, this is actually an update from a story I gave you last week. Last week, I talked about how the city of Hartford, Connecticut had decided to fly a Christian flag outside City Hall just before Easter. And two members of the city council were like, maybe this is a bad idea. One of the guys is like, I wrote the rules for how we conduct business, and you are violating the law right now. And I know that because I helped write the law. But those two people were outnumbered 7-2. So they flew this Christian flag. And there's a question of, is that a violation of the law? Will anyone file a lawsuit over that? Who knows? But this is where it gets fun. This guy right here, this is Chaz Stevens, and he's from Florida. He's an activist. A lot of times that you may have seen him recently is when a state passes a law, like in Louisiana, to put the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Chaz is like, well, I'm going to make some 10 Commandments posters, but they're going to be written in Arabic, or they're going to have a red satanic symbol in the background. I'm going to send schools those for free. And guess what? It's a donation. You should put it up. Like, that's his style of activism. So this is Chaz. And after he heard about that story in Hartford, about them putting up a Christian flag, he said, well, guess what? I have a flag. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for his flag? This is his flag. I'll remove myself. Ministry of Chaz the Bropostle, the Church of Satanology and Perpetual Soiree. Satan loves the First Amendment. This is his flag. And he's like, I want you to put up my flag outside City Hall because Satanology, which I guess is a pun on Scientology, he's like, Satanology is my religion, and how dare you discriminate against me? So he has now decided he's going to go to all these cities that have hoisted religious symbols on the flagpole. And that's not just Hartford, Connecticut. Other cities include Bridgeport, Connecticut, Merced, California, Manteca, California, Johnson City, Tennessee, Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. He's just getting started there. But he's going to go to these cities and ask them to put up their his flag. And this is what he told the local news outlet about all this. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in Satan, but it's to draw an uncomfortable attention to something. So it's pushback, the fact that there are flags up, Christian flags or religious flags at City Hall and public space that's uncomfortable to a lot of us. The flag says Satan loves the First Amendment. It's not profane. It's not vulgar. There's nothing about this flag that should raise an eyebrow. If you put the cross up, which is a symbol of their beliefs, you should put up my flag. Which, yeah, he's not wrong about that. And he adds, when they put up the Christian flag, they made the flagpole a public forum. And with a public forum, you have to have the free flow of information. You can't pick and choose. So he is right about that. If you're going to allow a Christian flag to go up, you don't get to say no just because someone else comes in and they have a religion you don't agree with or you think is satire. It doesn't matter. I spoke with Chaz earlier this week, and he told me, I'm sending letters to a whole bunch of other cities. I got a text from him just before I came on air today, where he's like, I just sent letters to the following few cities, too. And the amazing thing about this is what he is doing now is exactly what two of those Hartford council members said would happen if they raised the Christian flag. They said, you're going to get requests from people you may not want to approve. And remember, one of those council members said, the guy who helped write the ordinance, the law that they should be living by, said the flag is not a forum for free expression. And that's why you can't put up the Christian flag. It's not a free expression forum. It's not a public forum. And also, he said, the flagpole is an endorsement by the city. So he said, if we put up a Christian flag, we are endorsing a religion. We cannot do that, but they did it anyway. Here's a quick plug that I feel like I owe Chaz then, if I'm mentioning this. He is trying to train other activists to join his fight. And you can go to revolt.training if you want to be a part of that. And he actually said in the email he sent to all these city leaders, you've opened the door. I'm simply walking through it with horns held high and very, very sharp elbows. I'm not here to provoke. I am here to participate. But I won't be denied the rights you've granted others, which is hilarious. Here's another reason, like his fight is working. This weekend, he actually made the front page of the Hartford Courant. Religious flag prompts satanic request. And if I can zoom in, I don't know if I can zoom in. I want to zoom in on one of the things he said on the front page. Look at this right here. At the very bottom right, still on page 1, there is case law talking about limited public forums and the fact that the government put up this flag means they have to put up other flags. They made the mistake. And if you play a stupid game, you are going to win stupid prizes, which is a great way to talk about his own satanic flag, which is just hilarious. So in Hartford, they actually went to those two city council members and they're like, hey, this dude wants to put up a satanic flag. What do you think about it? And they asked one of the guys who voted against it. What was his name? Joshua Mictum is his name. I want to show you what he said because he's well aware of what Chaz is doing here. And look at this. It seems like this letter was sent to poke the city in the eye for for its poor choices previously, and it seems like he knows how to do that, Mictum said. Certainly, the law is on his side. I will vote against the religious flag, and I vote against raising his flag for the same reason, but it seems to me that what he is going to do is sue us to force us to raise his flag, and he would be right to do so. Maybe we'll learn a lesson. That's not usually what city council does, but maybe this will be the special occasion. Fantastic. I love that so much. Like, even that council member's like, yeah, I don't want him to raise his flag, but also he's totally right in everything he's doing. So will he be successful? I don't know, but we'll find out. By the way, there's one city, New Britain, Connecticut, which said to a reporter in response to his letter, they said, we're rejecting his proposal because all flag requests have to come from local residents. And Stevens lives in Florida. So I'm just saying, look, if any of you live in New Britain, Connecticut, and you want to raise some good trouble, stir some good trouble, get in contact with Chaz at revolt.training, and I'm sure he'll send you a flag to put up there. So that's interesting. One of the city's flag policies, by the way, some of them say we're not going to put up anything that is inappropriate, offensive, discriminatory, or controversial, and they have a right to do that to maintain peace and public safety. That's in New Britain, Connecticut. But again, this goes back to what counts as controversial. Because if they're going to say we're not going to put up that satanic flag, it's offensive, who gets to decide that? Because there's nothing on that flag I showed you that is offensive. It's not. It's not anti-anything. It mentions Satan, but it's not anti-Christian in any meaningful way. Christians are the ones who believe in Satan. And so if they want to say no, even if a local requests it, now they're really setting themselves up for a lawsuit. By the way, I find the Christian flag offensive, so maybe that shouldn't go up. Does that count? Or do my views not matter in all of that? He also said in an interview with me, Chaz did, that he thinks donating to his cause at revolt.training would be the best way to help him out, because he needs to raise funds so he can sue the cities that are ultimately going to reject his proposals. Up to you. But anyway, I love that he's doing it. I don't know how successful it'll be, but we're going to find out very soon, because he's literally targeting cities that have put up Christian flags or said they're okay with it. I'm going to look at any questions here. Let's see what we got. Yeah, you're making my point right here. I find Christianity offensive. And yeah, obviously, it shouldn't matter if you find it offensive. If it's legal, it ought to go up. So, but the question is, they're all basically going to make the argument that Satanism is somehow offensive. You don't get to distinguish. That's not your job. So we'll see. What else? Oh, this is good. This is the more polite version of FAFO. I'll leave it at that. What else we got here? Send one from the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Listen, any of you can get any flag you want up in some of these cities, right? It could be fun. This is an interesting point. The cross is a symbol of death and torture. His is way more publicly appropriate. Fair point. Anything else here? Yep, best troll ever. Very true. Another one, Satan loves the First Amendment. I love that. Perfect. No notes. Yep. He's having fun, and it is fun covering his stories just because they're always like this. His other instance of where he was trying to do this is in the Broward County Public Schools in Florida, because that school district had advertisements outside the football fields at their high schools. And so local businesses, in theory, could pay money to have their banner outside the football field. So Chaz said, all right, put up my Satanist banner. And they said no to him. And he filed a lawsuit over it when they said no. But also, he wrote the lawsuit himself. He didn't hire a lawyer. He just tried to do it himself. And eventually, it was tossed out by the courts. However, the fact that he kept pushing them, it made the school district change its policy to say, we will not allow any political or religious banners to go up, because they had said yes to a church banner. So they said new policy, no politics, no religion. However, so that means Chaz won that battle. But that also sets up the school district where if a right-wing Christian group says, if you allow banners to go up, you can't say no on account of religion. That's kind of what the Supreme Court's been saying. So if a right-wing Christian group wanted to go after the school district for that reason, they could totally do it. They just haven't done so yet, probably because it's Florida, it's their own people. But this is the sort of good trouble that Chaz causes. All right, let me go to a different story here. We got a video component in the next one. Let's see. Okay. Here's an interesting story. The mayor of a town called Winter Garden, Florida, they recently passed a proclamation honoring the Day of Prayer, which today's May 1st. It was today, the Day of Prayer. So a local resident named Joseph Richardson, he emailed the city a few weeks ago, and he said, I would like you to issue a proclamation for the Day of Reason. Now, Joseph Richardson is a member of the Central Florida Free Thought community. They do a lot of stuff like this. And when he sent his email, he actually included text of the Day of Reason proclamation. And I just want you to read some of this because it's very formulaic, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Whereas the principles of reason, critical thinking, and the scientific method are fundamental to the pursuit of knowledge, the advancement of society, and the betterment of humankind. Like, right, we're basically promoting reason, critical thinking, no discrimination, yay, First Amendment. And then this is the part he added at the bottom for the mayor to sign. Therefore be it resolved that I, Mayor John Reese, do hereby proclaim May 1st as a National Day of Reason, urging all citizens to reflect on the importance of critical thinking, to engage in open and respectful dialogue, and to uphold the principles of secular democracy. It's a wordy proclamation, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's just saying, hey, let's keep being awesome. So what happened when Joseph sent in that request? Well, by the way, if you think that's anti-religious, what you're saying is promoting critical thinking is apparently a knock on faith. And I think that says more about you than us, but all right. But anyway, if you're going to say yes to a proclamation for the Day of Prayer, you might as well say yes to this proclamation, because if you say yes and you just sign some paperwork, I promise you no one's going to notice. But if you say no, a lot of people will notice. And that's pretty much what happened here. Because the morning after Joseph Richardson sent in that request, the city clerk responded to him with a short message. And here's what it said. Proclamations are at the pleasure of Mayor Reese and presented to him for consideration by our city manager, John Williams. Your request is being forwarded to both of them for review. Okay, fine. Go send it off to them and let them put their stamp on it, right? But 2 weeks later, after he sent that email, Joseph Richardson had still not heard back from the city. So he emailed the clerk back and he's like, hey, what happened to my proclamation? And the response he got is that the proclamation you have requested, as noted in this communication, is not on the April 24th, 2025 agenda. So that was a polite way of saying, yeah, we're not doing it. We're not putting it on the agenda. We're not voting on it. We're not doing anything with it. There you go. So he writes back. He's like, well, what was wrong with it that you're not considering it? And all of a sudden, he stopped getting responses altogether. So then, what happens at that April 24th meeting? Turns out there's a local journalist named Noreen Dworkin, and she runs a publication called Vox Populi, which covers Winter Garden, Florida. And so she heard about this issue. So she showed up to that meeting because there's a section for public comment. And she thought, well, when I get a chance to speak, I want to ask the mayor why he said no to this proclamation. The mayor is going to be right there. By the way, this right here, this is John Reese, the mayor. She's like, he's going to be right there. So I'll ask him why he said no to this. So what happened at that meeting? She had her time, and I'm going to read some of this to you. I'll read some of it to you, then I'll play you a clip. But she asked him, Mr. Mayor, what is objectionable about this proclamation? Reese responds, I think the city manager answered you, and I'll let it go at that. And Dworkin said, well, if we embrace the Day of Prayer, how is the Day of Reason different? To which Reese says, a thank you. Then she said, well, I have one more question that I did not ask the city manager, and I will ask you. And he says, send it the right way, send it right. And she says, I did, you don't respond. And he says, well, to be honest with you, I don't read anything you write. I'll tell you that. I think I told you that once before. She says, yes, sir, you did. He says, I don't read anything you write. I see no point in it. Thank you. So this dude is just being a dick to her. And like, I don't like you. I'm not listening to you. I don't read anything you say. He totally reads what she says and he's not happy with it, right? And then she keeps, at some point he says, your time is up. And she's like, no, I don't think it is yet. So she just keeps asking questions because she's a journalist, right? And she says, how is this not seen as the mayor imposing your own religious views on the committee? And he says, I'm not imposing anything. She says, you are. And then the mayor says, we passed a resolution as part of this council. We passed a resolution in 2022 that addressed all of it, that covered it. And what he's implying is that in 2022, they passed a resolution recognizing the value of DEI, which was cool at the time, right? They recognized diversity and equity and inclusion. And he's implying we passed that resolution, so liberals should shut up. You got what you wanted. Why are you still here? And the journalist, Dworkin, she says, really? The DEI resolution covered it? How is there equity? And he says, end of discussion. And she says, all right, end of discussion. Thank you. I appreciate your comments. And she walks away. Because again, I wanted her to fight, but she's not there to fight. She's not an activist. She's a journalist. I want to play for you what happened right after that, though. Because after she left, the mayor could have gone on to the next person, but he decided to keep talking. And let me show you what he said. He mumbles a little bit, but I think you could still understand what he's saying.
I'm going to say one other thing. Probably shouldn't, but we've been set here for 100, 200 times and been ignored. And so they're ignored, and get upset. And it's my opinion that a couple of them showed no respect for God, no respect for our country, no respect for our flag, no respect for our Pledge of Allegiance, and no respect for the City Commission. And I better just say that's sad. Leave it at that.
I better just say that's sad. He said that he keeps hearing about this stuff, but a couple of people, they show no respect for God or country or the flag or the pledge and us. He didn't need to say that, but he just volunteered it. And it was damning, because what is he really saying? He's saying, I'm not imposing my religious views on the city because, back in the day, we passed a DEI resolution. He told them he told one constituent he doesn't read her emails because he doesn't see a point to it. He blasted people like her and Joseph Richardson because they don't show respect to God, as if that's supposed to be some sort of prerequisite for speaking to the city. Weird. And he's suggesting they're not real patriots because they criticize the country and the pledge, which, by the way, both of those deserve to be criticized. So this week, I spoke to that journalist, Dworkin, and I'm like, what else did you really want to say to this guy? And one of the things, again, she was professional about it. She said, it's not enough to just pass the DEI bill. You have to act on it. And I did ask her, how come you didn't point that out? Because, you were standing right there. And she said her job was to ask tough questions. And if this guy wants to be a dick to her, these are my words, not hers. But if this guy wants to be a dick to her, her job is to just put it out there and let the voters see it for themselves. I hope they do. But I don't know if they'll care. Because, look, you expect this from Republican politicians. But a theoretically nonpartisan mayor who doesn't really deal with culture war issues, by and large, should not be acting like that. Just because he finds some people annoying doesn't mean you dismiss their suggestions. And if he doesn't want to issue the proclamation, the least he can do is explain why he's against it instead of, baselessly slandering the people pushing for it. And by the way, this guy is not nonpartisan in this sense. He has taken part in multiple city events promoting Christianity. So I don't know if this fight is over yet. I did ask Joseph Richardson if they had any plans to do anything, and he just said in a statement, Winter Garden is not a Christian city. Mayor Reese has failed over and over to be true to his oath of office. Because of this, I call on the mayor to resign immediately, which is powerful words. He's not going to, but that doesn't mean anyone should stop criticizing his irrational decisions. And it means if you live in that area in Winter Garden, you should follow up on this. You should contact your city council representatives and demand they figure out how to handle this in the future. Figure out how they're going to make sure people are not shut out because they're atheists, because they request a day of reason in response to a day of prayer, things like that. And if they're not going to respond to you, then get to work in getting them voted out. All right, what questions do we have here? What else we got? Oh man, lots of stuff about Elon Musk in here. Oh, hey, yeah, I forgot to say this. Hit the like button. Come on. Lawsuit incoming. I don't know if it's happening. It could, in theory, but also I don't know if any group wants to fight this particular battle given all the other ones that are happening. It seems like small potatoes, but it's frustrating. So I don't know if they're going to file a lawsuit yet. What else we got here? Man, you guys are talking a lot about crosswalks. I'm trying to skip over those right now. All right, I'm going to move on to the next story just so we're not here forever. Give me a second here. Okay. Let's talk about Arizona. They have a school district known as the Peoria Unified School District. And a few years ago, they got a new member on their school board. Her name is Heather Rooks. And I may have talked about her a while back, but it's been a while, so I'm going to talk about this. When she got elected to the board and sworn in, it's January of 2023. And it turns out at their board meetings, there is a section of the meeting where all the board members are allowed to just get a few minutes to say whatever it is they want. It's just a section called board comments. And a lot of times, board members commemorate a holiday or they draw attention to issues faced by the district. They address things that may not have been on the agenda that night. You know what I mean? So what did Heather Rooks do when she entered the board? She decided to use that time to spread the gospel. And so did one of her conservative allies. So like February, just weeks after she was sworn in, she began her remarks by citing Proverbs 22:6, which says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Which, by the way, as I know most of you know, that is a verse that has been used to justify child abuse. But she was just citing that. A couple weeks later, she opened her remarks with a reference to 1 Corinthians. And, you know, this goes on for a little while. And eventually, the board president at the time says, hey, you know, our attorneys have said reciting scripture at board meetings goes against the law. It goes against the Establishment Clause. And they said, you might think this is your First Amendment right to say whatever you want, but that's not how the First Amendment works, because you're not speaking as an individual. You are speaking as a representative of the school board. So First Amendment rules don't apply to you right here. And she's like, oh, that's adorable of you to say. I'm going to keep talking. By May, her colleague, the conservative colleague, Rebecca Hill, she used a Bible verse that has often been interpreted as a threat to non-Christians. It's Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, where she says, if whoever causes one of these little ones to stumble and sin by leading him away from my teaching, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. How dare you cause a little one to sin? And then Rooks followed that up with a different Bible verse. This goes on for a while. So again, these two members on this 5-member school board, they're just using their time during board meetings to promote religion, and they're not quoting the Sermon on the Mount, right? Just like the worst parts of the Bible. And so now you have legal groups starting to get interested in this. The group Secular Arizona, their executive director, Gene Castine, actually spoke at one of those school board meetings and just issued an apology to all non-evangelical students and families. She said, "I'm doing this as a caring adult in this room where last month one of the board members called for your eradication because you're not sufficiently Christian." The Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote a letter to the district saying you can't use school board meetings to promote your religion. And they also pointed out they have sued a different school district, Chino Valley in California, for doing something very similar. And that district had to pay legal fees worth over $200,000. So they're warning this district, put a stop to this now, or we'll come after you and we'll probably win that one as well. And they sent a follow-up letter later. So what did Heather Rooks do after all this? She didn't give a shit. She kept reciting Bible verses. And by July, this is where it gets interesting. By July of that year, this is July of 2023, she issued a very different statement. The district had told her to stop. And she said, based upon the district's letter, I will refrain from reciting Bible verses at this time and will have my attorneys at First Liberty Institute handle this matter. So the district's lawyers were saying, don't quote the Bible. And she's like, well, I have lawyers too. And my lawyers say, for now, I will keep quiet, but we're looking into this. Okay. And what else did she do? Oh, right. Her colleague did not make that statement, but also said publicly, I swore to God that I would uphold the Constitution, which includes my First Amendment rights. All right, whatever. So guess what happened by September of that year? Here's the headline from First Liberty. Arizona School Board sued by member for censoring scripture reading at meetings. Yeah, First Liberty, the conservative legal group, they said they're representing Heather Rooks, and they said, we're suing the school board for telling her to shut up. Freedom from Religion Foundation's like, we might sue you if you allow this woman to keep spreading her religion during school board meetings. And she's like, you can't sue the school board. I'm suing the school board first. So this lady on the school board is suing the school board because they said, hey, maybe don't do that so we don't get sued. And then she's like, whatevs, I'm going to sue the board. That's seriously what she did. This is Heather Rooks, by the way. Very persecuted. Yeah, she looks exactly what you think she would look like. So this is what she did. She said she's suing the school board. And in her lawsuit, it was 28 pages, she said she deserved absolute legislative immunity for reciting the Bible at meetings. She wanted the judge to say it's totally fine to recite Bible verses. And then she wanted attorney's fees and damages and money for telling her not to cite the Bible. I also want to point out one other thing here. This is how First Liberty described what she was doing in their press release. Just look at this. This is unbelievable. Heather most certainly can use inspirational quotes from religious, historical, and philosophical sources and figures as a source of personal information, as well and encouragement, okay, they don't do proofreading, to the community at large. They're saying, yeah, she could say whatever she wants to inspire people, except she's not citing Plato. She's not citing all sorts of places. She's quoting the Bible, and she's not doing it to inspire people. She's doing it because she's a religious zealot who thinks you just got to say Jesus 12 times a day, or like, I don't know, someone's going to come in your house and kill you or something like that. I don't know how scary movies work. But like, they're spinning this as she's just trying to inspire everybody. No, she's not. Everyone knows that. But this is the lawsuit that her people filed. Here is the lawsuit. I mean, you could see this lawsuit for yourself. She filed that lawsuit against the Peoria Unified School District. One of the things she says in this lawsuit is that, hey, the U.S. president, the A bunch of U.S. officials quote scripture all the time. Therefore, there's nothing wrong with me doing it. That's one of the arguments for lawyers made in that lawsuit. But here's the problem with that. The courts have routinely said there's a big difference between Congress doing this or even a city council allowing an invocation during the invocation part of the meeting versus school boards doing the same thing. And the big difference is that there are kids, theoretically, at school board meetings. Because they may be present, those gatherings are school-sponsored events. And therefore, it's illegal for administrators or employees to push faith on kids, even if, like this lady, they insist they are not trying to proselytize. And obviously, if you want to study scripture in class in an objective way to compare like what Ecclesiastes says compared to other works of literature, that's fine. No one's saying you can't do that. You can even do it in other classes if it's appropriate. That's not what she's doing. One of the other things First Liberty said that I want to point out here, let me make sure I can pull this up. And, oh no, I don't know where it went. That's okay. I will just say it to you. They said, Heather Rook's use of quotations from a sacred and historical text, the world's best-selling book, to solemnize public occasions and fortify herself to perform her official duties fits comfortably within a long-standing, well-accepted tradition. It's tradition to quote the Bible at school board meetings, you guys, which is bullshit. Besides the fact that anyone who needs to read a Bible verse out loud in public in front of a microphone to do her job well, to me, that says you can't do the job. Like, why can't you just go do it? Reciting Bible verses at school board meetings is not a tradition, much less a long-standing, well-accepted one. They're just pretending that what she does is the same as when the president does it, because there's no legal precedent for someone like her to do what she's doing. So that lawsuit should have been dismissed because the board attorneys and FFRF, they were right all along. Prayers don't belong at school board meetings, and board members cannot use the meetings to push their religion on other people, no matter how innocuous they want you to think it is. Like, remember Joe Kennedy, the football coach who wanted to pray at football games at midfield because he's an attention-grabbing guy that just wants attention? Even in his case, they said, you got to wait till the game is over, till you do your showboaty religious ritual at midfield, because you can't do it when you're doing a school-sponsored activity. This lady is doing her religious thing during a school-sponsored school board meeting. So you can't do it. By the way, if she ever read the damn Bible, she would know there are specific verses about not praying publicly because that's not what Jesus wants. But whatever, she hasn't read it. So where else am I going with this? So the reason I'm bringing all this up, that lawsuit was filed a year and a half ago, September of 2023. And earlier this year, this is part one of the things I want to share with you. Earlier this year, a judge finally weighed in on the matter. And let me just show you the end of his ruling. The court, therefore, finds none of Rook's cases persuasive. More importantly, the court also finds that she has failed to meet her burden of establishing a cognizable injury for her post-enforcement challenge, which is legalese for saying, no one stopped you from doing your religion. What are you talking about, lady? And they say without an injury, she doesn't have standing to bring any of her claims. So the judge tossed out her lawsuit. And what the judge basically said is, you're going up against the school board. You're saying the school board discriminated against you. How dare they tell you not to pray? But they're not stopping you. They're warning you. They're saying, we think this is illegal, so you shouldn't do it. You can't sue them for warning you that they think this is illegal. And that's it. You can't sue them over that. So the judge tossed out the case. That means she lost the case. But how did First Liberty treat this? They basically said, you guys, she won. Why did she win? Because First Liberty said, well, I guess you can keep praying until they actually stop you, because then we would have an injury and then we could sue again. So what happened after she lost that lawsuit earlier this year? Heather Rooks still recites Bible verses at board meetings. She's still on the board. Guess what? She's now the board's president. Last year, a conservative slate of candidates basically swept the school board election. So she now has a 3-2 majority, and those three elected her to be their president. So she's now the school board president. As one local media outlet put it, at first her attorney said they would appeal this decision. Now they say she essentially won because the district won't stop her from quoting the Bible. So it will actually, you would have to file a lawsuit now to get her to stop because nothing else is going to do it. But there is another side to this as well. And this is one of the reasons I really wanted to bring this up this week. She lost the case. That means the school district technically won the case, but that also means they had to defend themselves in court for the past year and a half. And that's not free. And so this is a story that came out this week because reporters filed public records requests to find out how much money did the school board have to spend to fight back against the school board member / president. And guess what they found? Check this out. It's from KJZZ in Phoenix. The lawsuit has cost the district roughly $218,000 in legal fees, according to a public records request. I found one other source that had it at 216, but it's the same thing. This lady has cost her own school district near $250,000. Why? Because they had the audacity to tell her, hey, we think that what you're doing is illegal, so maybe you shouldn't do it because that would be bad. She sued her own school district. The school district had to spend over $200,000 to defend itself, and it won. And she still hasn't stopped, which means if there is a lawsuit over this, they would have to spend even more money defending themselves against all this. Like, imagine how selfish a school board candidate you have to be to not only want to be on the school board, but then try to destroy it from within. Like, this lady does not give a shit about the students in the district. She wants to damage the school district. And now she has a majority of conservatives who are going to help her do it. And that school district has to defend itself against her. It is bonkers that people in this school district, Peoria Unified, voted for someone to sabotage their own community. That is money that is not being spent on the children in that district. And by the way, as I was doing research for this story, I kept getting confused because I'm like, this lawsuit against the district, I keep running up against someone's name who is not Heather Rooks. What is going on here? And the thing is, the school district, with its conservative majority now, is being sued separately by a transgender teacher who specifically cited Heather Rooks and Rebecca Hill, that other Bible quoting person who is no longer on the board, but it doesn't matter because there are other conservatives in her place. That teacher was placed on paid administrative leave. Why? What did this teacher do that was so damning that they had to be put on paid leave? That teacher sent out a staff-wide email letting colleagues know how they could support students on the International Transgender Day of Visibility. That's it. The teacher said, hey, today's Trans Day of Visibility. Here's what you could do to support kids who might have a sticker on. And here's what a local newspaper article about this lawsuit said. According to the lawsuit, Hills and Rooks began a public campaign against that teacher, referred to them as a child groomer, and accused them of sexualizing children. Rooks even disclosed that teacher's home address, and afterwards someone tossed a rock at the teacher's window. Why? Because again, that teacher said, hey, fellow staffers, here's how you can help students who are wearing the Trans Day Visibility sticker. And these two school board members decided to make that teacher's life a living hell. Because that's how much they care about this school district. This is the thing about conservatives. They don't want to improve anything. They want to destroy what everyone else has built. So that district now has to spend even more money defending itself from the actions of its own school board members, not just for the Bible verses, but for harassing one of their own teachers. Like, this is what happens when you install ideologically driven right-wing extremists to run a public school district, instead of competent adults, hell, competent teenagers whose main goal is to make sure students actually get a good education. These conservatives don't want that. Like, they've turned this school board in Peoria into a Republican hate rally and church service rolled into one. And by the way, more about Heather Rooks, this lady who's now the president of the school board, besides the prayer debacle. One of the things she did years ago when she first got elected to this board in 2023, they have a motto in the district. Their slogan is every student, every day. Fine, good slogan. But when they said it at the beginning of their meetings, because this district a couple years ago had trans inclusive policies, she would say every student, every day, except the girls, because she's just an asshole like that. She also follows neo-Nazi social media accounts. She whined about a promotional video about the district's history of racial diversity and inclusion because she said, you're making it all about race. There was also social workers in the district got a grant. They got grant money to go to an out-of-state conference to get better at their jobs. And she opposed them being able to do that because that conference had some sessions that helped train social workers on how to be anti-racist. And she's like, anti-racist? I don't want to support that. When they were looking for a new superintendent, Heather Rooks insisted one of the qualifications needs to be love of country, because apparently, I guess if you're liberal, you don't love the country or something. And my favorite version of her being completely useless here, Microsoft offered a free partnership with the district where they would provide like computer science equipment so kids could learn computer science. It would have helped a ton of students. I don't know if they were donating computers or programming material, whatever, but she rejected that program because she said Microsoft supports DEI. Now, here's the thing. All those things I just mentioned that she's on the wrong side of, she was in the minority on the school districts when all that stuff happened. So she was talking into a void. She was outnumbered. Great. None of that stuff ended up happening. But like I said, last year, right-wingers flipped the school board, and now ultra MAGA type conservatives, they are in control of that school district, which means their actions will continue to rack up unnecessary expenses for the district, all because in Peoria, Arizona, the board members' selfishness takes priority over the needs of the children. Oh, what other questions we got here? That story so pisses me off. Keith says, I finished my 2 beers, gonna grab 2 more. Buddy, you're gonna need so much more for stories like this. What else? I'm so goddamn sick of the conservative plague, this conservative plague. Hey, buddy, you're gonna have so many more plagues in the years to come. You could thank RFK for that one. What else we got here? Just scrolling. I hope I don't miss you. Can't they sue her for the money, time, and reputation damage? I don't think that's a thing you could sue for. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think that's how it works. And again, the thing that voters need to do is not vote for these people, but if they vote these people in, there really isn't much of a case. And plus, who's they? The they is Heather Rooks and her allies at this point. Arizona is already funneling public money into vouchers, so this is a major issue. That's very true. It's bad. Sean is doing drive-by preaching. What I heard in this last, not a single person here believes in the Lord. I promise he is real, buddy. You went to the wrong YouTube channel. What are you doing here? This is not where that conversation goes. You have failed. Someone sent you a wrong link. All right, I'm going to get on. I think, how many more stories? I have a couple more that I wanted to get to. This one is one I'm excited about because this has not been published anywhere yet. So I want to share this before I actually post it probably tomorrow. But this has two parts to it. One is a part you may have seen in the news. The second part is one I promise you have not seen. So this has to do with Donald Trump. He's just finished his first 100 days in this term. It's not going well. His support is dropping even among many of his most fervent supporters, because it turns out he's really shitty at this job. He surrounds himself by people who are even dumber than he is. His voters are even dumber than they are. This goes down for a while. He hasn't done the stuff he campaigned on, and the stuff he has done is just idiotic and destroying our country, right? So the Pew Research Center did a survey on whether or not people are supporting Trump, and they broke it down by religion. And this is where it gets interesting, because this is their headline that they posted this week. Here we go. White evangelicals continue to stand out in their support for Trump, which I know that's not surprising. Of course, white evangelicals like Donald Trump, but let me give you some numbers to back this up. In 2024, in the election, roughly 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. And that's pretty much the same percentage we saw in 2020 and in 2016. So 80% of them still by his side, not very smart people. Okay, that represents about 20% of the electorate, by the way. But according to Pew, what percentage of white evangelicals how many of them approve of the job Donald Trump is doing? Well, check this out. This is what they found. What percentage of people who approve or disapprove of the way Trump is handling his job? Let's scroll to white evangelicals right above my head here. 72% of white evangelicals approve of the job Trump is doing. Remember, 80% of white evangelicals voted for him. That support has now dropped to 72%. Interesting. And I know approving or disapproving of what he does, I disapproved of stuff Biden did. I would vote for him again in a heartbeat. So it's not necessarily the same thing, but it seems like there has been a drop in support among all of these groups. But among white evangelicals, it did not drop very much. I'll show you the rest of this graph and I'll remove myself from it because there are a couple other things to notice here. 72% of white evangelicals approve of Trump, and that is more than white non-evangelical Christians, 51% approval, and white Catholics, 51% approval. Black Protestants hate the dude, only 10% approval. And of course, people with no organized religion at all at the very bottom, only 26% of approval. So again, the takeaway here is that white evangelicals still support Trump, and their support has gone down, but it hasn't gone down that much. That's the big takeaway from Pew. And what does that tell us? It goes to show you no amount of needless cruelty or massive lies or total incompetence will lead conservative Christians to waver in their support for Trump. Like, once you have convinced them to accept things on faith, no amount of evidence is going to change their minds. It's true of religion. It is true of politics with those people specifically. All right. So here's another way we could look at the same data, or at least a different way of looking at it. Pew researchers also asked participants, how do you feel about the ethical standards in the Trump administration? Which is a hilarious question because, of course, the answer is what ethical standards? But again, what do you think about the ethical standards of people like Pete Hegseth, who leaked classified data, and RFK Jr., who is decimating our research capabilities while failing to contain an outbreak of measles? And what about Doug Burgum, who is getting rid of the people who maintain our national parks? You get a choice. They gave people a choice of poor all the way to excellent. 4 options. How do you rate their ethics? And it turns out overall, 43% of all Americans say the ethics of this administration are poor. It was the worst option on the list, and 43% of Americans say it's poor. True, but also just 43%? Really? Okay. But look at how they broke it down with religion. Let me show you this. I'll remove myself here. What percentage say the ethical standards of top Trump administration officials? And look at white evangelicals. 34% of white evangelicals say the ethics are excellent. And then another 35% say they're good. That is 69% of white evangelicals who say, yeah, we're totally cool with the ethics of this administration. And both of those numbers, 34% and 35%, are bigger than any other category, any other groups in those numbers. Sorry, I said that totally wrong. But you could see those bars, the 34, 35%, it's bigger for white evangelicals than for any other religious group. Kudos to religiously unaffiliated people. 59% of us say the ethics are poor. And the only reason we said poor is because none is not on the list. But also hats off to Black Protestants, because they see through this guy. 63% of Black Protestants say the ethics are poor, and another 26% say they are only fair. So when you ask white evangelicals about the ethics of this administration, nearly 7 out of 10 of them are like, yeah, they're above board. You cannot trust a white evangelical for guidance on how to live a moral life, because their moral compass is broken. They cannot spot immorality if it is staring them in the face. Here's one more question. What about trusting Trump? Again, the question is, what percentage of people, do you trust Donald Trump more than or less than or the same as previous presidents in office? So, do you trust Donald Trump? And what do you think white evangelicals said? And I'll give you a hint. White evangelicals believe the planet is about 6,000 years old, and that Jesus rose from the dead, and that eating an apple caused all the sin in the world. They're not good at picking up on obvious bullshit. So what did they say when it came to the trustworthy numbers? Well, check this out. Here we go. What percentage of white evangelicals right over here said they trust Trump more than previous presidents? 57% of white evangelicals say they trust Trump more than someone like Joe Biden, or even in theory, like George W. Bush. 57% trust Trump more. His entire life has been dedicated to telling lies about everything. And they're like, yeah, he's our dude. If you think Trump is an honest guy, maybe you like his policies because you're extremely stupid. But let's say you like his policies. You can still admit, yeah, he lies all the time, but I do like the stuff he does. You could say that. They're not even saying that. They're like, yeah, I trust him. As one commenter points out, trust Trump with what exactly? Yeah, I mean, just in general. They just trust the dude. What about non-religious people? 18%. Only 18% of us are like, yeah, we trust this dude. Again, hats off to Black Protestants, who only 9% of them say they trust Trump, because, yeah, they have good reason not to trust that guy. But oh my God, how do you trust this dude? There's no getting through to them. It seems like the white evangelical system here is we will believe anyone who is white, male, and speaks with confidence. We'll do it in church if you're in the pulpit, and we'll do it in politics if you just say things like, so that's part one. When I was looking at that data, none of that really surprised me. I'm not expecting moral clarity from white evangelical Christians. It doesn't surprise me he's doing really well with that particular group, because they do not give a damn about values. They never have, but they definitely don't in the Trump era. They will overlook family values that they always brag about when Trump is separating families. And they will ignore the Jesus message of care for the least of these if Trump is punishing brown people they don't like. So none of that surprises me. But here's what I was trying to figure out. You saw in all of those charts I just showed you that they lumped together all the unaffiliated, the religiously unaffiliated people. We're all the nones. That means the atheists, the agnostics, and the growing number of people who say, I'm not an atheist. I think there's something spiritual out there, but I don't belong to any organized religion. And I don't like that group because they're always wrong about everything else too, and they just drag our numbers down. So I asked the Pew Research Center, I'm like, I saw these numbers, but do you have a breakdown of what atheists said about all these things? I don't want to know what the religiously unaffiliated said, because that is a lump of numbers that makes no sense. It's like saying, this is why you never say, what do Christians think about Donald Trump? Because whatever answer I give you doesn't mean anything, because Black Protestants are very different about their beliefs than white evangelicals, as you just saw. So it doesn't make sense to lump together Christians. And using the same logic, I don't think it makes sense to lump together religiously unaffiliated people, because what atheists say is very different than what the New Age Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm spiritual but not religious people say. So I asked the Pew Research Center, do you have any numbers for me about atheists specifically? Right? And by the way, in 2024, exit polls showed that 27% of religiously unaffiliated voters supported Trump. Only 27%. I was looking for numbers like, how did atheists vote in the election? I still haven't found them because no group has broken down that data. So guess what? Pew Research Center said, yeah, we did break it down with atheists, and they sent me the numbers. And this is the part that has not been seen yet because they did not publish this, but they were nice enough to send it to me. Now, the reason they did not publish this, and this is the caveat, I'm fully admitting this, their sample size for atheists was really small. And that means the margin of error is going to be much, much higher. So it's not as reliable information as they had for white evangelicals, for Black Protestants, even for religiously unaffiliated people as a whole. That's why they didn't include this breakdown in their data. It makes sense from a statistical perspective, but I still want to show you what some of these numbers said. Okay, so let's start with Trump's approval rating. Like I showed you earlier, we know 72% of white evangelicals approve of what Donald Trump is doing, and only 26% of religiously unaffiliated Americans feel the same way. But what's the breakdown for atheists? Well, check it out. Here you go. And I'll remove myself here and talk about this. You could see religiously unaffiliated, 26% of religiously unaffiliated approve of Donald Trump, but look at the atheist number, 15%. Only 15% of atheists approve of this administration. And yes, the margin of error is higher, but there you go. Atheists are much more perceptive of how bad Donald Trump is than religiously unaffiliated people as a whole. So that is really, really interesting right there. At this point, you have to be one of those clueless atheists for liberty types to still think Trump is on the right track with anything. Okay, what about ethics? That was number 2. We said 69% of white evangelicals think the Trump administration's ethical standards are excellent or good. And only 23% of religiously unaffiliated people feel the same way. Well, what is it for atheists? Check this out. Ethical standards of Trump administration officials. Only 5% of atheists say it's excellent. And only 9% say it's good. Look at this. Where is it? It's there. 80% of atheists say the ethical standards are poor because that's the lowest option we can give it. We are so much better at figuring out ethical morality here than the most fervently religious people in the country. So that, again, fascinating information. And then the last thing was trusting Trump, right? Do you trust Donald Trump compared to previous presidents? We said 57% of white evangelicals say they trust Trump more than the alternatives. Only 18% of religiously unaffiliated Americans felt the same way. So what do atheists say specifically? Let's see right here. When it comes to trusting Trump, do you trust Trump more than everybody else? Atheists. only 11% of atheists say, I trust Trump more. 76% say, no, I trust him less. And by the way, 11% say they trust Trump more, but look at the margin of error. It's huge. It's 10.6%, which means this, in theory, the 11% who trust Trump more than previous presidents, in theory, we could be talking about like 0%. We're pretty damn close to zero. You could go that way. But the point is, even if the margin of error went in the other direction, and you said 20% of atheists think he's trustworthy or something like that, it would still pale in comparison to what white evangelicals think of this guy. So, very interesting, right? Basically, no matter what question you ask about the quality of this presidency, white evangelicals overwhelmingly approve of Trump, while atheists overwhelmingly reject him. And there's no margin of error that is going to take away from that basic fact. And given the way the American public is fed up with Trump's incompetence, with a majority of Americans now disapproving of his presidency, I would argue it seems like atheists are way more representative of the public at large, right? We're ahead of them. We're light years ahead of where the rest of the country is right now. They're catching up to us, not white evangelicals. So if you want to know where the country is headed, look to us, because we see what's going to happen. We're the ones whose patriotism should not be questioned here. Our demand for quality should not be subject to some right-wing purity test. And our respect for the sort of work done by federal workers who should be admired by the rest of the country, like, we're the ones that have respect for them. If Democrats want to regain control of the House and the Senate and win the presidency after that, I think it would be smart for the candidates who are announcing or about to announce to reach out to their most loyal voters and get them on board. And that is secular Americans. And I'm not saying they need to advocate for atheism. I don't think it's their job. I'm not asking them for that. But they need to advocate for church-state separation, funding of scientific research, and our institutions dedicated to that, accountability for all employees, and not in the bullshit Doge way that Elon Musk is doing, but actual accountability and efficiency, and acceptance of reason-based policies. And guess what? A return to actual morality as pillars for what this party should be doing moving forward. Like, the Congressional Free Thought Caucus actually is doing all of that stuff. That's part of their core mission. But there's no reason the entire Democratic Party should not be following suit. Because if you think there is moral bankruptcy in this administration, you're not going to find it with white evangelical leaders. You will find it with secular Americans. And these polls show we get it in a way that religious Americans don't. What other questions we got here? Dems need to advocate for something. Their platform has largely been not Trump for years now. I agree, but I would also say, guess what? A lot of Democrats do advocate for stuff. It just gets lost in the ether. What you need are really good communicators. I absolutely think the world of AOC right now. Max Frost is doing fantastic work. Jamie Raskin has always been a leader in this sense. There are people who can really advocate for the good of what the Democratic Party stands for and could be doing, and calling out what Republicans are doing that's so harmful. And the better they are at capturing that attention, the more people will actually get to hear it. It's a little staggering that only 5% of Americans are atheists. That's roughly correct. Yeah, I would have thought that with the spread of the internet, more people would be exposed to more rational thinking. So much for that. I mean, to be fair, the most famous atheists some people know are people like Richard Dawkins, Bill Maher, people like that, who are not exactly rational. So, but also I would say, yes, it's true. The percentage of atheists has not shot up, but the percentage of people who have left organized religion because they realize religion's not a force for good, that has gone up. And I think that has accomplished a lot of the same ideas you're thinking about. I don't need them in my club to agree with them, but I do think they should understand, if their eyes are open, they will understand organized religion is not fixing all these things. Hammond is preaching. Love it. Am I? I feel like I'm just stating the obvious in some cases. What else we got here before I move on to one last story? This is Neil deGrasse Tyson just came out as MAGA. I don't think he did. I just don't. Here's what happened. He posted a shirt that said something like he wants to go to Mars. It's the one thing he and Elon have in common. He had a picture on Instagram with a bunch of red hats that said things. I'm paraphrasing here, but like, make reason great again. He's not a Trump supporter. He's not a MAGA guy. But also, he has like Elon Musk's sense of humor, which is to say he doesn't have one. And I don't know why he thinks that stuff is funny. And I don't think you have to like give credit to Elon Musk for saying, let's inhabitate Mars or something like that. I don't really know what's going on with Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's weird. Any other questions here? To be clear, there are plenty of atheists who are conservative assholes. They're mostly white men who feel slighted by a woman, but they exist out there. And they all belong to the same groups and the same email chains and Twitter threads. Yup, I know it because they're always in my mentions all the time. Okay, I am going to jump down to one last story here. Give me just a second. Okay, I figured I would leave you with some good news at the end of all this. All right. I'm going to tell you about a church named Calvary Chapel in San Jose, California. So they made headlines in May of 2020. Worst part of the pandemic, right? There's no vaccine available at the time. People are indoors. And the reason this church was in the news at the time was because they were hosting large indoor services, not requiring face masks and not forcing people to socially distance. Like, even beyond that, the pastor, this is the pastor of that church. His name is Mike McClure. There he is. This guy was basically bragging during live streams about how the church is not compliant with local regulations. He said, and I'm quoting here, God does not want us to isolate ourselves. All of us need to be in the sanctuary. I don't care what they say. I'm never again going to close the doors, ever. Which I'm sure sounds badass, except when there's a deadly virus going around and we're not exactly certain what the problem is. Maybe listening to the scientists is a good idea. But by the end of the month, May of 2020, the church was holding 2 services every Sunday, each with like 300 to 500 participants. No one was required to wear a mask. Like, this is still the time of the pandemic when you could barely go to a grocery store, when you weren't able to get together with your friends outside because it was still ravaging the public. And this dude, Mike McClure, he encouraged his congregation to avoid masks, even if their health was at risk, not to mention the health of everyone around them. He also said, I'm quoting here, quote, "You have a 99.99% chance of not dying if you catch the virus." Like, that is not true. And he said the mask ordinance in San Jose, where they told people to wear masks in public, was an example of religious persecution in America. So then October of 2020 rolls around. There's no vaccine yet at the time. And the county, the county of Santa Clara was trying to mitigate this threat of COVID. So they said people have to wear face masks in all indoor public spaces with limited exceptions. That means if you're going to a church, you got to wear a face mask. It's indoors. And so, to their credit, the county did not look the other way when it came to this church. They started fining Calvary Chapel, ultimately fining them over $350,000 for violating the local ordinance. But the church never paid up because they're like, you're persecuting us. So then the county filed a lawsuit against the church, and they demanded the court shut that place down. Not because it's Christian, but because they're not following the rules. And the church was not shut down, but the fines kept coming. And eventually, between the fines and the late fees and the administrative fees and like the actual violations they were breaking, the church owed nearly $4 million to the county. So about 2 years ago, to this day, about 2 years ago, a superior court judge in California issued a decision on this matter. And I want to show you one thing from what this judge said. This judge in 2023 wrote that the county's regulations were legal, and because they applied to the general public, they weren't singling out Christians, right? So the exemptions that they had for like grocery stores, those were sensible ones. And I want to show you this passage from near the end of this judge's ruling. Again, 2023. Look at the top of this page here. It should appear clear to all, regardless of religious affiliation, that wearing a mask while worshiping one's God and communing with other congregants is a simple, unobtrusive, giving way to protect others while still exercising your right to religious freedom. Unfortunately, defendants, Calvary Chapel, repeatedly refused to model, much less enforce this gesture. Instead, they repeatedly flouted their refusal to comply with the public health orders and urged others to do so. Who cares what the cost, including death? And look at the next bit. Because the church argued that the amount of money you're making us pay the county is cruel and unusual punishment. It's way too excessive. The judge says the cumulative fine amount that they argue is excessive is solely the result of the church's own egregious conduct and election they chose to continue violating public health orders despite repeated efforts by the county to compel them to comply. Defendants cannot complain about the cumulative size of the penalty when they had control over all of this, yet allowed the penalties to accumulate. In other words, you wouldn't have to pay all this money if you just did the right thing, but you chose not to do the right thing, so you don't get to complain now when the fines get bigger. Love it. So that's what the judge said 2 years ago. And to put it in other words, there's no evidence the local government treated secular activities that were similar to church services any differently from the way they treated this church, right? So the judge also pointed out, so some of those fines, they had to pay $4 million. The judge reduced it to $1.2 million, but the church had to pay $1.2 million to the county, which honestly, that is a small price to pay for the harm caused by that Christian group's ignorance and selfishness. And at the time when they did that, the county actually celebrated that decision. Look at what they said at the time. This is, what's the date on this? April of 2023. This is what the county said at the time. It is the county's job to take care of its residents and protect the public health. The county's response to the pandemic, including the health officer's public health orders and enforcement against entities that refuse to follow the law, saved thousands of lives and resulted in one of the lowest death rates of any community in the United States. Calvary's arguments have been rejected at almost every turn. We're gratified that the court once again saw through their unsupported claims and found them meritless. Fantastic. Love that statement. That's awesome. Now, the church, not surprisingly, said we're going to appeal this ruling. But again, at this point, their arguments have been dismantled. What exactly do you think is up for debate at this point, right? So here's the news. This is the reason I'm talking about this story now, because an appellate court in California has finally issued its ruling because the church appealed the case. So that court has now issued its decision on this church. And guess what they said? Dude, just listen to what the earlier judge said. That judge was right. We are not overturning that judge's decisions. The church was still wrong. The judges said the county didn't treat the church any differently from everybody else. There's no proof otherwise. And even if you didn't like the safety measures, they were applied to everyone equally. And look at what they wrote at the end of their decision. This is like page 37 of 38 right here. Here we go. Further, it cannot be disputed that COVID-19 is a highly contagious disease that caused severe illness and death during a global pandemic, that Calvary Chapel was aware that some of its congregants had contracted COVID-19, and its school, because they have a school, had sustained a serious outbreak, and that the county issued the public health orders requiring face coverings in certain circumstances as part of their effort to slow the spread of COVID. We therefore determine that the undisputed facts show that Calvary Chapel's level of culpability due to violating the public health orders requiring face coverings is high. Yeah, it's your fault. And therefore, the fine in amount of $1.2 million do not violate the excessive fines clause of the Eighth Amendment, because those fines are not grossly disproportionate from the shit you did. Incredible. Incredible. So the appellate court said you still got to pay out, right? So listen, the bottom line is that the church did not have some constitutional right to spread a deadly virus because they're Christian. It's as simple as that. The church they were always free to live stream their services like a lot of churches did. They could have held in-person services that followed the local restrictions like other groups did. But they didn't want to play by the rules. They believed that being Christian gives them the right to ignore laws you don't like and spread a deadly disease and put other people in danger. Thank goodness a court is saying, no, you weren't allowed to do that, and now you got to pay the price for it. And I want to share one last thing with you. This church is like, who are we? We're not going to listen to the government. The government doesn't control us. Well, guess what happened during COVID that this church also did? They asked the federal government to give them over $340,000 in PPP loans to pay for its staff that was out of work. And guess why they were out of work? That money was meant to pay employees who had to stay at home because they couldn't work, even though the church's whole shtick is, no, you're all coming to work because we're keeping this place open. So what the hell are they getting money for? But guess what? It doesn't matter because that loan was forgiven. They had no problem asking the government for money when it helped their bank account. But as soon as the government said, keep other people safe, they're like, how dare you tell us what to do? And how dare you fine us for breaking the law and spreading a virus? And at least now it seems they are going to have to pay for it. And the only recourse they have at this point, if they don't want to pay the $1.2 million, is to go to the California Supreme Court. But again, even forget the makeup of the Supreme Court. There's no legal reason for the Supreme Court to overturn any of this, because the church is not making any arguments as to why it should have been allowed to break the rules. It's not like the county was allowing different groups to meet in public, but then had these rules for the church. No, there's no evidence of that. So, hey, some good news. This church actually has to pay a price for putting the rest of us in danger. I'm going to just look one last time for questions. I'm going to ignore some of what you people are saying. Not this one, though. I'd rather wear a mask than pants. You can wear both. No one said you have to choose. What else we got here? I don't know what you people are saying about Dr. Fauci, but I'm going to ignore that. Is there anything else here? Calvary Chapel rakes in millions. They're super popular, or were at one point. I imagine they're still popular today because, again, if you're a right-wing pastor saying we're not going to listen to the government, so let's spread a disease, I'm sure that's appealing to their people with the brain worms. I don't know how it works, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are still popular. This is what happens when I read backwards. I'm seeing the ends of your conversations, and I don't know why they started. All right. I apologize if I missed anything, but I'm going to continue. I think I'm just going to end it there. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. I know it's Thursday. Thanks for sticking with me for all these stories. I should be back next Thursday as well. Hopefully we will see Den as well. And as always, if you're watching this, to all of you who are watching live, you could subscribe to me at friendlyatheist.com. I'm going to try to get up that story about the atheists and their approval rating for Donald Trump tomorrow. And if you want to support the work I do, you can go to patreon.com/Hemant. And that's it. I'm going to call it a night. I will see you later. Have a good weekend, everybody.